Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. In this video we're going to talk about Scorpio season 2022 and what looks to be probably one of the more intense months of this astrological year. Of course, Scorpio season every year has the potential to be intense. I think we would all agree that Scorpio is probably the most intense of all the signs. It's certainly a quality associated with the Scorpion and the sign. But this year, even more so because it happens to coincide with eclipse season. We're going to be having the second set of eclipses of the year. We had the first set back in Taurus season, back in April, May, and now we're having the second set of eclipses here in Scorpio season, where we're going to have a new moon in Scorpio and the full moon in Taurus later in the month. And that new moon will be a partial solar eclipse, and the full moon in Taurus is going to be a total lunar eclipse. So pretty intense alignments here this Scorpio season. So a lot to unpack as we look at the month ahead. So without further ado, we'll jump in. As usual, I have some slides prepared, some visual aids to help us kind of see through what we're talking about. Some of the language of the archetypes, I think it's helpful to visualize. We'll look at the chart. We'll see what the aspects are providing us for this month. We'll take a look at the solar system so we can sort of visually see where are we in this physical universe, in the solar system, and why are we looking at these alignments, and why are they so impactful in our lives from this sort of geoplanetary perspective. So lots to cover, so let's jump right in. The title of this Scorpio season 2022 I'm calling Wild Cards and Wake-Ups, right? And the reason being is that's kind of what I associate, and many astrologers will associate with eclipses. They're kind of wild cards. We never really know what we're going to get with an eclipse. Something hidden is often revealed, but often something that has been hidden remains hidden, right? Is occulted, is blocked out, whether it's the light of the sun being blocked out by the moon in a solar eclipse, or the earth in alignment with the sun blocking out the light of the moon, or the reflected light of the moon, we should say. It's never quite obvious what gets revealed, but usually there is, and there's a wake-up call when eclipse seasons come around. There's something very deep and intuitive and powerful with these particular lunations that are occurring as they are here near the nodal axis. And if you've followed this channel, we've talked a lot about the nodal axis over the last couple of years because it's really been in play in terms of the aspects. Last year, Pluto was squaring the nodal axis for a good period, almost the whole entire year. This year we've had Saturn squaring the nodal axis. So it's really been calling us into a deeper awareness of the archetype of the nodal axis itself and the signs which it is moving through. So this year we're really focusing on Taurus, Scorpio, North Node, South Node as being this sort of personal and collective compass that we're moving through. And we've spent a lot of time talking about it in past episodes here. We'll probably talk about it even more as the year continues. We're not through it yet, but this is probably one of the culmination points of dealing with this archetype and this archetypal pair, right? This Taurus-Scorpio axis, because the lunations, now we're having the moon, full and new moon, right on this axis. It's really going to amp up the intensity for sure. So intense Scorpio season. So let's just start with just talking about, what does it mean that it's Scorpio season? Well, of course, that means the sun is spending a month moving through the sign of Scorpio. The sun being the symbol of our selfhood, our individuality, our drive, our motivations, really it's our identity, right? The sun is the most powerful planet, it's not a planet, it's a star, of course, but it's the most powerful planetary symbol in astrology. That's why sun sign astrology works so well. It's why we identify with our sun sign. I'm a Gemini, I'm a Sag, I'm a Scorpio, right? We're saying my sun is in that sign, and I identify with that powerfully. So obviously those who are having their birthdays this year are sun Scorpios. So always an intense time for them. But for all of us, we can experience this experience of the sun moving through Scorpio. So that functional identity of the sun is taking on the qualities of Scorpio for the month. And we can see Scorpio, that fixed water sign ruled by Pluto. It's a very intense, libidinal, dark, underground, transformational type of sign. It's all about trials and tribulations. It's about the descent to the underworld in a lot of ways, right? That transformational type of hero's journey, the dark night of the soul, right? Which is why, if you know Scorpios, you have Scorpios in your family, or you've been in relationships or friendships or partnerships with Scorpios, you know the intensity of which I speak, right? And it's all about power dynamics with Scorpio, particularly emotional and sexual power. It's known as the most powerful sign, intense sign. But I always like to remind myself when I'm looking and dealing with Scorpio energy is that it actually comes from a sense of powerlessness oftentimes, right? This sense that Scorpios are really aware of a lack of power. They see in themselves what they lack, that they're powerless, and they see things in others who have that power, that capacity, that thing that they desire. So what Scorpio energy does is it forms relationships with the objects or the people it desires that has what it lacks. And by process of relationship, that osmosis, it empowers itself through the relationship dynamics, which is why Scorpio is always associated with relationships and in the intense emotional dynamics, the power dynamics that take place within relationships. So Scorpios are intense if you've, like I said, if you've been in a relationship with them, and so Scorpio season is a time for all of us, though, to touch that Scorpio nature, to get in touch with it in ourselves. We all have Scorpios somewhere in our charts, whether, the sun sign Scorpios, if you're a sun or a moon or a rising in Scorpio, you're going to identify strongly with this. Myself, Scorpio is in my 12th house. So it deals with my unconscious. It deals with my dreams and the fantasy world and sort of the hidden secret parts of myself. And that's where I deal with the Scorpio archetype. I've got Neptune natally there, which is a really interesting signature, which highly creative and imaginative and can really get into some of these darker, deeper realms that Scorpio invites us to explore. So invite you to think about where Scorpio is in your chart. And as always, it's a reminder that if you've never had your chart done, if you don't know where what your rising is, and so therefore where Scorpio would fall, really advise you to, get yourself a reading. Of course, I offer them. So go to my website, astrolab.com, astrolab21.com, sign up for a reading. If you're interested, I'd love to share that blueprint with you. So back to Scorpio sun. So that kind of sets the table for what we've got this month. All right, so without further ado, let's jump and take a look at the chart. As usual, I have it set here for the moment that the sun ingresses into Scorpio here, and we'll take a look at that. October 23rd, 2022 at 6:36 in the AM Eastern Standard Time. And we see right here we've got the sun at 0 degrees of Scorpio. And what's obvious right away as we look at this is we have not just the sun moving into Scorpio, but we have Venus moving into Scorpio, sort of walking into the sign of the Scorpion hand in hand with the sun. So this means that we're experiencing a conjunction of Venus and the sun. This is the superior conjunction. It's the time when the Venus is on the other side of the sun from us on Earth in a conjunction. So I'll show you that here. Let's just go back. I was looking at this earlier at the full moon, which is interesting. But here we can see from our view on Earth, right, that Venus is opposite the sun here in its superior conjunction, as opposed to when it's between the Earth and the sun, which is when it's retrograde. So this adds a little added dimension and sort of impact to this initiation of Scorpio season that year adds a nice Venusian quality to this. So along with the sun moving through Scorpio, we get Venus moving into the sign, bringing all of her gifts of that softer feminine side, of an aesthetic sense of beauty, of glamour, of love, of being more receptive to the things that our desire nature. So it adds a nice sweetness to this inauguration of Scorpio season. Of course, it can also show up in a shadow side, as always. We always remind ourselves with that, right? We think of sort of an idea of being a little vain, an idea of vanity or a shallow self-absorption could be configured with this transit. So you want to be aware of that. But in general, there's something really nice about Venus here sort of softening and welcoming us into the more intense relational dynamic that is Scorpio. So perhaps we can have some of those deeper emotional conversations in a kinder, gentler, more harmonious way. That's the hope anyway. And that's what's on offer here. If we can work with these archetypes and these energy patterns, that's certainly in the cards for us. So a really nice, comfortable, easy deepening of the relationship energy could be in the cards for all of us if we can channel this energy properly. It can also get a little aggressive. You could get some hurt feelings. There could be some wounding, right? So you also have to be careful how you unpack some of these energies. But in general, a pretty nice start to the Scorpio season here. And then what I want to look at just, what was the other thing here? This very same day, before we move on to the new moon, we'll see that Saturn is stationing direct here in Aquarius. So it's been retrograde for the past, 5 months. So now it's about to sit still in the sky here, 18 degrees of Aquarius, slowing down before it begins its move forward, right? And so we're starting to end all of the retrograde seasons. Last month we had Pluto stationed direct and now moving forward here, making its last pass through Capricorn, where it's going to move into Aquarius for a bit of time in 2023. So that'll be something we'll be watching very closely on this channel for sure. We'll be doing a video on that specifically, which is a pretty exciting, and the next couple years with a lot of these outer planet transits are going to be pretty intense and pretty energetically impactful, I think. So it's something we really want to be able to have our antenna up for as we navigate these very exciting times, whether you want to say about what's happening in the world. It always reminds me of that Chinese proverb, right? May you live in exciting times. I think we certainly are in some pretty exciting times. And the astrology kind of supports that. We can see we've had some very intense aspects over the last couple years and have really been a wake-up call, right? As much like we talk about the eclipses being a wake-up, we are getting all of these opportunities to awaken to something much deeper that's going on the planet, within our consciousness, within our culture, the sort of the noosphere, this energetic pattern that we're creating through our society, through all of our interactions and relations. A lot going on, and that's why I think astrology is super helpful as a way of understanding this, of seeing these greater patterns unfold, making sense of that, and then being able to work through it in a more conscious way. Okay, so that's what it's all about. So this Saturn stationing, we're going to talk about Saturn a little more when we talk about the full moon, the ongoing square with Aquarius, with Uranus, as I should say, is now going to be at its closest point here as it stations. It's 1 degree away. So we could look at, the square we've been talking about here between Uranus and Taurus. That arrow should probably go that way, right? Saturn and Aquarius. It's been a theme for, the better part of the last year and a half, almost 2 years. This is the last time they'll be this close. They're not going to make it too exact. Uranus is going to retrograde, Saturn's going to move forward. So this is as close as it gets, and it's kind of the last hurrah of what I've been calling the clash of the Titans. And I think this configuration, again, if you follow this channel, we've talked about this a lot. I did a really long video on the Uranus-Saturn cycle. I think one of the best videos I've done to date. If you haven't seen that, give that a watch. It's really, I think, interesting and really puts a perspective on where we are in a much bigger cycle, something that started back in 1988, and then we're in the midst of it. So this will be interesting because this is going to get triggered very powerfully, as we'll see later on in the video, by the the full moon and the total lunar eclipse. Probably the most intense point, certainly in this cycle, and probably one of the high points of the year, I think. So that's good to note. So Saturn moving forward, which is good. There's a discipline involved. There's a progress. There's something very concrete. We may have had the last few months, some of our projects may have come to a halt. Some of our ideas, some of our connections in the communities we're working with, that Aquarius energy, may have had to been recapitulated, reviewed, reassessed. Now we'll get a sense of moving forward, and we'll see how that plays out. I always encourage you to try to find, the positive uses of Saturn. It really wants to be of use and utility. It doesn't, I don't think, enjoys its role as the taskmaster. It just has to play that role because no one else will. So sometimes we just need a kick in the butt from the universe sometimes, and Saturn is pretty good at it. So let's move on and let's talk about the new moon. So just, a couple days into Scorpio season here, on the 25th of October, we're going to see, we'll get the new moon at 1 degree of Scorpio. Of course, Venus still there at 2 degrees. So again, keeping that Venusian quality. There's something really, potentially really delicious about the triggering of this cycle. There is a way of finding the Venusian in it, right? That really comfortable, easy, joyful, ecstatic, yummy type of energy. Wherever Venus is, she tends to bring that with her. So here in Scorpio season, now the reason this is a partial solar eclipse is because it's not so close to the axis here. We're about 12 degrees away. So it won't be one of those total solar eclipses. But it will be visible here in parts of the world. I thought it was interesting to note that where it's most visible is going to be over Eastern Europe. So Russia, the Ukraine, and Iran will all see this partial solar eclipse because it's happening during the day over there. So I think that the symbolism here is pretty telling, right? You've got the moon, the feminine symbol of the moon, blocking the solar rays, the masculine solar rays of the sun. So when I was looking at this, I really thought of what's going on in Iran with this women's movement going up against the oppressive, masculine, male-dominated theocracy there. So it'll be interesting to see how this lunation plays out, triggered here by the new moon, and then we'll see what culminates in a couple weeks thereafter with that full moon. So this whole cycle should be really amplified by, I'm seeing as I look at all these symbols, the power of the sacred feminine, the wisdom of women and their own journey towards enlightenment, transformation. Much of the literature and the traditions in terms of wisdom and enlightenment for the past, 6,000 years have tend to be male-dominated, right? We are ruled by masculine sky gods, when thousands of years ago they were feminine earth gods. We talk about Gaia and necessity and the original goddess, the mother goddess. Feels like those tides are turning again, and there's a touch of the feminine here in a lot of the aspects that we're dealing with over the course of this month. So it's something interesting to highlight. Did want to show We talk about the nodal axis here. It is occurring on the nodes, right? So what we have is the south node is being configured here, which is sort of the past, versus the north node, which is more future oriented. And I just wanted to highlight the two signs that are involved in this lunation, these eclipses, right? So we're getting the Scorpio energy here at the new moon on the 27th, or the 25th, I should say, and it's taking place under the auspices of the south node, sort of a mystical or spiritual involvement. Tends to be the qualities we've developed in past lives. It's involved with imagination and creativity. It's much more sensitive and whatnot. So that's just all to sort of give a context for what this solar eclipse is going to do. Again, it seems to have more of these feminine, imaginative qualities to it. So good time to set an intention always with the lunations, with any new moon here in this Scorpio season, to really get in touch with the sacred feminine. And that applies to men and women alike. We all have Venus in our charts. We all have that function in us, whether we're men or women, right? Just like women all have Mars in their charts. They have that functionality. What Jung called the animus, which is the inner male, which often gets projected in the relationships with men in the case of women, or anima, the inner female, which men will often project in their relationships with women. But the real power, the alchemy, is to really transmute that and to find your own inner anima or animus, depending on whether you're a man or a woman, and to integrate that, to create a sacred marriage, to create a more complete, holistic individual. So, food for thought as we move into Scorpio season. Now, the next thing we'll probably take a look at, I'm just going to start clicking through here, and I know that if we get to the October 30th, so now we're coming right into Halloween. The days around Halloween are going to be pretty interesting. First of all, we get Mercury joining the Scorpio party here on October 30th. It's moving now quite much quicker, moving into the sign. So not only do we have our sun, our identity, dealing Scorpio, we have Venus, our sensuality, getting that Scorpio treatment. Now Mercury, our mental process, our thoughts, our ideas, our communications, our interactions, our day-to-day dealings with businesses and transactions, and all of those things that Mercury rules. Now that's taking on the flavor of Scorpio too, and this is setting us up for what's to come here with the new moon, with the full moon, I should say. So we're getting this, what we would call a stellium in the sign of Scorpio. We've got 3 planets. We've got the south node. This is really starting to gather some energy, and we're going to see it's going to create a tension along this axis with the nodal axis as we're moving into the month. But you'll feel that sense of this gathering of a center, of a core that is Scorpio, right? And that is this intense will to create powerful, dynamic relationships. It's sexual, it's libidinal, it's very deep and secretive. It can be, as we talk about with all of these qualities of Scorpio, right? The desire nature, that magnetic, sometimes obsessive, compulsive desires that we have. It can get very fixated. It can become vengeful. Often traumatic experiences are associated with this kind of energy. The experiencing of them and also the healing of them can also come through this sign, right? You can get to a sense of spiritual mastery, but it is never an easy road to hoe with Scorpio. It's always challenging, so we always want to have that caveat. So, all right, let's move on. What's coming up next? I think if we look at, I wanted to show you what's happening on Halloween. Something else that's been a phenomenon that we've been dealing with here since early August is Mars's movement through the sign of Gemini. Now it's about to station retrograde here on Halloween. So it's been moving forward, and now it's going to retrograde for quite a while. I think it's about a 7-month period. Now, normally when Mars moves through a sign, it goes through at about a sign per month, thereabout. So, but whenever it gets to its retrograde, it really slows down. And in this case, it's going to spend its entire retrograde period in Gemini before moving forward again. So we're going to get, this over a year and a half long cycle of Mars in Gemini. So something that we should probably familiarize ourselves with. Let's see. Here we go. So what do we get with Mars in Gemini? Well, of course, Mars is that function of our sort of aggressive, independent, instinctual nature. It's associated with the libido. It's associated with, the male masculine potency or virility. And again, when I use those terms, it applies to men and women alike. As I said, every woman has Mars in her chart somewhere and has this function and should know what that function is and should be comfortable using that function, right? So when we get Mars in Gemini, well, what happens? Well, that aggression, that independence, that initiative gets channeled through our mental capacity, right? Gemini, I think, right? So we're going to start thinking more independently. We're going to have more aggressive conversations, and our communication style is going to be more forceful when Mars is moving through Gemini. And you may have noticed that in your dialogues, in yourself, in your interactions with others since Mars has moved into Gemini back in August. Now that it's moving retrograde, we're going to get sort of an inversion of this trend, right? It becomes more internal. It may tend to, there may be a sense of frustration. Oftentimes this can be a frustrated place for Mars retrograding through a sign. Mercury, it's not its favorite place in the zodiac to be. It's not bad. It's not its fall or detriment. It's just, it's having to, it wants to be more physical. It wants to be more action oriented, and to have to channel its energy through the mental modes and the duplicity of Gemini, right? That sort of two-sided, two-faced, never, wavering, and that's just something Mars is not about. Mars wants that straight line, direct access. So be aware over the course of the next few months that some of our communication may be more difficult. We may have to have harder conversations. We may want to be much more aggressive and just sort of mow people over with our ideas. And that could get us into some difficulties in our relationships, in the workplace for sure, in your personal relationships, in your family, in your social circle. It can show up just about anywhere. So be aware of that. But that's something that we just want to track here. And it's just interesting that on the day that it stations retrograde, it's in this inconjunct with the moon and Pluto over there in Capricorn. That's something that I'm tracking as well. This year, 2022, as you saw in my year preview, Mars was making a series of conjunctions with all the outer planets over the course of the year, starting with Pluto back in February of this year. And that coincided exactly with the outbreak of the war in the Ukraine, which couldn't have been more symbolic of a Mars-Pluto conjunction. So we've talked about that. So I'm always looking at what's going on between Mars and Pluto as this conflict continues to unfold and evolve. And it's interesting that as the moon comes over in this very powerful lunation cycle is exactly conjunct here, we're going to get this inconjunct with Mars. Something around, this Halloween, there's with inconjuncts, very difficult energy. There's no way for Mars operating as it is here from Gemini, where it's in an air sign, trying to relate to Pluto in that earth sign of Capricorn. They just aren't getting along. They don't jive. So maybe there's communication breakdowns, much more aggressive rhetoric and language around the sort of war footing, that Mars-Pluto sensibility with the moon coming there. Something just emotional, can be emotionally triggering. I just look at this, when I saw this, I was like, this is a day where I'd be a little wary of some of the rhetoric that we've already been hearing and the actions, right? So just something to sort of keep your eyes on as the month unfolds. I want to then move, let's get right to the goods here. So this Halloween period, it's all leading up to November 8th. And so we might as well just jump right there and take a look at what's going on, because I want to highlight this. So here we're going to see, here is the full moon in Taurus. We've got the sun at 15 degrees Gemini, and now we see much closer to the nodal axis. It's occurring within 2 degrees, right? Which is why this is going to be a total lunar eclipse. So we've got the sun here in Scorpio. We've got the moon, an opposite sign of Taurus. And here we're seeing what this energy is involving with this total lunar eclipse. So this stellium is really intense. They're all within, 5 degrees here. So a lot of Scorpio energy here connected to the south node, to the past, to that emotional past that we've been trying to heal all during this 18-month cycle while the nodes are moving through these 2 signs. Really coming to a head. So if you've been doing that work, you can expect some real breakthroughs during this full moon. It's really going to be an intense day. Now, we also see that with the full moon here in Taurus, almost exactly conjunct with Uranus. So this is going to add a dimension of radical intensity to what's already a pretty heated, intense signature on its own. So I did want to show, so let's talk about the moon in Taurus, right, alone, right? So what we're getting here, and what I'm getting from this full moon, there's a lot, and I talked about the feminine energy, and I think it's not, it's uncanny actually that this total lunar eclipse is going to take place on November 8th, which is the exact same day as the midterm elections here in the United States. And interestingly, an election in which the issue of women's reproductive rights likely will play a great role in the outcome of this election. It's one of the things that's motivating a lot of voters to the polls. So we'll see what plays out. But I think if you look at the moon in Taurus, you don't get a more apt symbol for women's reproductive rights. The moon is the mother. It is the womb. It is the maternal, right? And Taurus is all about reproduction. It's about the survival of the species through sexual reproduction. That's Taurus, right? So here we have moon in Taurus being eclipsed by the sun in Scorpio. So this is kind of a whenever you have oppositions, as a full moon is, it all comes down to the relationship dynamics. There is a tension between these 2 polar opposites that needs to be resolved. At its highest, there is some compromise. There's a meeting in the middle. But as we see play out in the world, often these oppositions, we don't get the highest expression, and we get the failure to negotiate, the failure to resolve, the failure to meet in the middle, and each side sticks to its guns, so to speak, and stays. We get polarity. We get polarized conditions, a polarized culture. So this is a metaphor, again, for really what's been playing out for a long time here, but it just seems to be keeping amping up. And it feels like this month, the intensity of this, as I said last month, it feels like we're moving towards a more, there's just more momentum going on. As the outer planets start to move forward with Pluto and Saturn, some of these things that tend to play out on the bigger social picture are really starting to move forward. So just wanted to share that. And then the idea of the moon and Uranus together is a really interesting symbol, right? And here we can see on the left side, I'm highlighting some of the more, the higher aspirations of what this configuration could bring, right? This vitality and inspiration, the excitement of awakening, right? That Uranus is that gift of an awakening, of a sudden insight, of being inspired, right? The rebirth of optimism, beautiful, right? Opportunities to heal, right? Uranus is inventive and creative. The moon, that natural, nurturing energy, wants to heal. And the sense of feminine liberation, right? That's, like I said, you can't write this stuff. And I think, again, what we talked about earlier with the new moon and being over Iran, it'll be interesting to see what the next couple of weeks unfolds in that situation. But one could think one way that this really supports this sort of idea or notion of feminine liberation. Of course, you get the shadow side, which is this emotional restlessness, a sudden impulsiveness. We can get manic mood swings here with the Uranus moon contacts, very erratic behavior, and disruptions to like domestic security and a sense of calm that you may have in your own home. So a lot to be aware of, right? So that energy is palpable. But then the other thing, the other factor here, as we go back to the chart to look at, is that this this moon is in exact square with our friend Saturn. I don't know why it doesn't want to stay on there, but you get the point here. So now we've got Saturn in the picture as well, sort of hanging in the balance. And what is this going to symbolize? What does this mean? Well, this brings up the issue of that Saturn-Uranus square that we've been talking about for a couple of years. This is, like I said, the last gasp of it, and it'll never be this close. So to me, this is a culmination point, and for all of us, right? So we can look at this individually and say, well, God, what have we gone through in the last couple of years? This whole experience of the pandemic, and what that meant to our personal freedom, how we had to sacrifice for the greater good, right? Saturn in Aquarius versus Uranus in Taurus, really wanting to be individuated and do what feels right for ourselves. We have been forced into this conflict with these two planets between the personal freedom and the collective responsibility. And I do want to bring up, one of the slides I had from, this last quarter square. And if you can just kind of puts it in perspective, right? It was March 2020 when this began, right? The very beginning of the coronavirus here in the Western countries. And it will end its orb here, if we talk about it being within 5 degrees in this mid-December here. So think about all that has unfolded under this configuration, right? With the coronavirus lockdowns, we had the riots in the Capitol, the vaccine rollouts. Now we can add the abortion rights to that. We've got talks of, civil war in America. It's really gotten, the erosion of democracy. It's been a really contentious couple of years. And it's a crisis in consciousness. That's what this last quarter square always tends to present us with. And then if we think about, what is the way out, the way forward from this? Something as I was reviewing for this video, it's like this idea of responsible freedom. It seems to be the most important takeaway that we can get from this whole 2-year square, right? Responsible freedom, right? The freedoms we have come at a price. We have to be responsible for that freedom. We have to own it. It's not, freedom is not free, as the old saying goes. And this has been a period where the astrological weather has put that in really sharp detail for us, hasn't it? We can see freedom is not free. It takes a great deal of responsibility. That's the Saturn side, where Uranus is the liberator side. But these two seemingly antithetical forces are always in this symbiotic dance. This is the march of time, the march of culture, the march of evolution in a lot of ways pulses to this rhythm, and the rhythm of these two planets as they form these configurations throughout a 40-plus year cycle, which we're in 3/4 of the way through, last quarter square. So something to think about. I feel like if you can be responsible for the freedom you have, kudos. And sharing that and promoting that is really the way forward. because we want to avoid the shadow qualities of this. And we've seen far too much of the shadow side of this configuration. This tension between past and future, sudden shocks, rude awakenings, hyper vigilance and responsibility, irresponsible or harmful rebellions, the negative side of modern science and tech. So, all of those qualities and shadow characteristics have been, I think, more prevalent than I think most of us would like. So how can we be more responsible? How can we take a sense of ownership of democracy? And it feels like that's really on the table right now, as crazy as that seems. So I expect this to be a pretty intense, this midterm election, November 8th, occurring on a total lunar eclipse. That symbolism is fairly rich, isn't it? So something to look out for, but being aware of that energy and how it's working within your own life too. It's like always reminding us the collective is just an aggregate of our individual actions and energies. So what we do with this energy as an individual affects how it plays out with our relationships, our families, our communities, the collective. So, what do you want to channel for this full moon, this total lunar eclipse? Are you want to bring in this liberated feminine energy, this breakthrough, or are we connected to the past through Saturn? Are we wanting to halt the progress we see because we think it's moving too fast and we want to conserve our history and our past? That's the tension that we're going to see play out. And it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks here as we move through Scorpio season. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a roadmap for what you can expect here in the next month. It's a fun time of the year, a Halloween season, but it can get scary, it can get dark, it can get spooky. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. Those energetic patterns are certainly constellated here by what's going on with the planetary positions. So hopefully you can navigate those in a way that is helpful, that's transformative, that keeps you evolving and moving forward on your own personal destiny. That's my hope. So yeah, have a safe, happy Halloween. If you're here, if you're in America, get out to vote. No matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on, that vote, the right to vote, is one of the great gifts of our democracy, our constitutional republic. But we do instill and inspire to these democratic values. So I hope it's a historic voter turnout either way, and let the will of the people, speak, and then we'll move forward, because I think it does ease up a little bit. Once the square starts to lessen as we move into December into 2023, that particular tension will start to ease. But how it gets resolved here in this next couple months will kind of set the tone for what happens over the next almost 10 years until the next conjunction in 2032. So big picture, right? Lot to think about, and we're planting seeds. You're always getting the opportunity to set the tone, to plant the seeds, to get on the good side of these cycles, to ride these energy patterns in a way that is most beneficial. So I hope that for you. All right, have a safe and happy Halloween and safe and happy Scorpio season. See you next time. Salam.